right, the hour of 8:30 having arrived, I'll call us to order. Can we do a roll, please? Ms. Everett?
Absolutely. Elliott?
Here.
DeCiani?
Here.
Pachowski?
Here.
Krajewski? Covert? Rutledge?
Here.
Okay, first item of business, I'll entertain a motion to approve the minutes of our meeting last month.
So moved, DeCiani.
Second, Rutledge.
All right, any comments, changes, corrections, anything like that? Hearing none, seeing none. Ms. Everett, can you call the roll?
Sure. Elliott?
Aye.
DeCiani?
Aye.
Pachowski?
Aye.
Krajewski? Covert? Rutledge?
Aye.
I think can the minutes reflect that Member Krajewski has now joined us?
Absolutely.
Okay. Chairman's remarks, save that to the end. Do we have any public comment?
We do not.
Okay. Grant proposal notifications. It looks like, at least on my agenda, we have none. Is that
We
correct?
have none. That's correct. I'm sorry. That should be off there.
Okay. And then I will entertain a motion to approve FIR 63820 for
Krajewski.
of funding.
Second, Rutledge.
Any discussion or questions on this item? Hearing none, seeing none. Ms. Everett, can you call the roll, please?
Absolutely. Elliott?
Aye.
DeCiani?
Aye.
Pachowski?
Aye.
Krajewski?
Aye.
Covert? Rutledge?
Aye.
All right, next we'll move on to item 8A. I'll entertain a motion for approval of item 2020-265, recommendation for the approval of a contract purchase order to ComEd.
Motion.
So move. Krajewski, second. Krajewski.
All right, looks like they want lights and power over there in line. Any discussion or questions on this? Hearing none, seeing none. Ms. Everett, roll please.
Elliott?
Aye.
DeCiani?
Aye.
Pachowski?
Aye.
Krajewski?
Aye.
Covert? Rutledge?
Aye.
All right, the item passes. Next we'll move on to the update from Choose DuPage. Excuse me, not Mr. Rock, Mr. Bedalov.
Lisa can give the update for Choose DuPage if she'd like. That's fine. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I believe I have a presentation that someone is going to share, and now I see it coming up. I wanted to, as always, give the Economic Development Committee an update on where we're at with the Small Business Grant Program. I know there's a special call this afternoon regarding the restaurant program as well, so I thought I'd give you an update on where we're at to date. Next slide, please. As you know, the acceptance criteria from phase one was that you could not receive previous COVID relief funds. You had to have qualified expenses per the CARES Act, be in good standing with the Secretary of State. If you were a 1099, 50% or more of your income had to come from 1099 work. Your business revenue could not exceed 1.5 million, and you needed 15 or fewer full-time equivalent employees. Next slide, please. During phase one, we had roughly 600 recommended applicants for the relief grant with total relief funds of $6.271 million. That was against the original allocation of $7 million that the county provided. Now, I will let you know that since this was created, we are still working through the final stragglers in the pipeline, and that number is now closer to 6.7 million. There's going to be some applicants that come in front of the county board, some recommendations rather, in front of the county board next Tuesday, along with the first tranche of restaurant applicants. So we're going to be roughly 6.7, 6.8 out of the 7 million from phase one. Next slide, please. The phase two acceptance criteria remained largely the same. The only thing was we removed the restriction for having received previous COVID relief funds. The county board allocated 9 million for this phase of the program. Next slide, please. For this phase of the program, we had 693 recommended with a total amount of 9.3 million. So as you can see, doing some quick math, being around 6.7 million from phase one against the $7 million allocation and 9.3 million from phase two against the $9 million allocation, we're going to be right at that $16 million grant amount that was allocated by the county board for phase one and phase two. Next slide, please. Now we move on to the restaurant program, which was approved recently by the county board. As you know, it focuses on establishments where 50% of the revenue comes from the sale of food and beverages. With revenue of $4 million or less, there is no restriction on the number of employees, and the business must be in good standing with the Secretary of State. Next slide, please. So a week from today, we're going to be bringing forward 163 recommended restaurants for funding in a total dollar amount of $2,427,000 against an allocation of approximately $2.5 million. We are still chasing down 3 or 4 restaurants in terms of getting us the information. However, the county auditor and county staff needs the information by a date certain. That's today. So they may make it in, they may not, but we're going to be very close to the 2.5 million that the county allocated. We did receive 294 applications, totaling around $4.4 million worth of requests. So as you can see, we had to reject quite a few. No surprise though, and you'll recall that when we opened the portal, we left it open for 90 minutes before we had to close it. Next slide, please. So that concludes a brief overview. Depending on the action that the county board takes this afternoon, we are ready, willing, and able, and enthusiastically looking forward to administering the second phase of the restaurant program and to help out the business community and stand ready to do it. From a traditional economic development perspective, again, thank you very much. Want to take a moment to recognize the folks at the county. Greenleaf Foods, which I believe I told you is a new addition to DuPage County, locating their test kitchens in Lisle, Illinois. A lot of great jobs, scientists, researchers. There was an issue providing gas to the building so they could operate their test kitchens. We worked very closely with NICOR to expedite the process, and I want to give special thanks to the folks in the permitting department out at DuPage County for expediting that permit. Greenleaf could not have been happier with the customer service they received. And the landlord of the building, additionally very happy, and is a new member of the board of directors of Choose DuPage. So thank you to the county for expediting that for us and helping the business community. Happy to answer any questions, Chairman Elliott.
So thank you, Greg. I appreciate that. Can the minutes reflect that Member Covert has joined us during that presentation? Does anyone have any questions for Greg? Member Krajewski, then Member Renahan.
But actually, not questions, but it relates to the programs. And then also, I know we have a special call later today. I know when we went to the second phase of the businesses, we removed the PPP restriction. But there were still hundreds and hundreds of businesses in DuPage that didn't get PPP, but also didn't get our program. Those businesses benefited. But as we move into this restaurant phase, I know Member Hart raised this at our board meeting last week about having restaurants eligible that had already received PPP money. So I know we'll have some discussions on that, but I kind of support Member Hart's comments on that too. I thought this was a kind of a restaurant program that we were initiating. Second, I know I had at least one restaurant reach out to me, and I think there was maybe a second one. We had put in the original business, not restaurant, program, and it was kind of mirroring the federal PPP program that you had to be in business as of February 15th, I believe. I know I have one in my district who's been rejected under this restaurant program, but they did 6 months of build out and they opened their restaurant on February 27th. So they've been declined, even though their restaurant was shut down by the governor's order for like 4 months, and it's shut down, or 3 months, and it's shut down again. But they don't qualify because they weren't open last year. I think you have several of those in DuPage, or a handful of them, but I think they should still be eligible, because clearly when a restaurant was shut down by the governor's order, they can't be, doing much business. But we just put that in there because the original PPP that the federal government put in was being open February 15th. I'd like to see that restriction removed for some of these restaurants that may be open this year, no fault of their own, are suffering just as bad as ones that were in business a year ago. Thank you.
It certainly was a rough time to open. Member Renahan?
Thank you, Chairman Elliott, and thanks, Greg, for all your work you've done. I'm curious. We had approved the first tranche, so to speak, of $7 million. Then we opened 9. Then we had a hard time getting to quality candidates to fill out that 9. And I just want to make sure we're not going to have the same situation with the restaurant. I know you said you had received 4.4 million in requests, but still that doesn't really answer the question of quality of applicants. And I'm sure a lot of these restaurants are probably mom and pop, type thing. How's it going quality wise?
Well, I think the reason that the rejection rate continued to hover around 40 to 50% for the most part on the applicants that we saw from the first phase of the restaurant, Member Renahan, if I understand your question correctly, is because I think, to be blunt, restaurants that had revenue in excess of 4 million still chose to apply. Despite the fact that we marketed it and let everybody know that there was a $4 million revenue restriction, we had revenue of 5 million, 10 million, that just said, well, maybe I don't know what they were thinking, but they applied. So I can tell you in terms of the quality of the applicant itself and in terms of the ability for us to review them, restaurants are much easier than businesses because restaurants provide what's called ST1s, which is their sales report on a monthly basis. And they have those readily at hand. And it's easier for us to compare ST1s from 2020 to say 2019. So we can show the hardship, and then we can do the math to determine whether or not they hit the 4 million. What we're planning on doing, if the county board approves at the special call later, our tentative plan anyway, in terms of applicants and how we're going to look at them, is kind of use the same parameter, open the portal. We literally review them as they're coming in. And when we hit 5 million, we kind of hit the pause button and take a tertiary glance at the applicants that we've gotten to that point, because they have to have given us some information, the amount of revenue, where they're located, and then we make the judgment call to see if we should leave it open or not. I wish I had a more scientific approach to it, but we can't stop a restaurant that does 10 million in sales from applying to the program, even though they know it's only a $4 million revenue cap.
Yeah, I guess I'm just wondering in terms of percentage wise on this, the original 2.5 million, I mean, how's it looking?
I think that was on the presentation. I think we had about a 40% rejection rate. I don't know if that answers your question.
And Greg, if I can jump in, of that 40% rejection rate, how many of those, what portion of that was attributable to what you just described, which is people who just facially didn't meet the criteria applying?
80%.
Okay.
And as Member Krajewski pointed out, we had about 20% that unfortunately opened after February 15th. We had some, maybe not 80%, Chairman Elliott, maybe 70, because one of the other big things that we found in one of the key components was PPP or other COVID relief funds, per the federal guidelines, must be considered when we, as the administrators of the program, evaluate the hardship of the business. In other words, if your business was down $30,000 in revenue, but you got $50,000 in PPP, you have no financial hardship. The federal government says you don't have a hardship that you can show. And we had several restaurants who received more money in PPP than they had in lost revenue. So those businesses were rejected as well.
Okay, thank you. Anyone else? Member Ozog, and then back to Member Krajewski.
Thank you, Chairman Elliott. Just as curious, were those not eligible with over 4 million? Did they tend to be chains, or did you find they were independent? I was just, no, they were independent. Okay.
Quite frankly, they were independent, yes.
Okay, thank you.
All right, and then Member Krajewski.
Yeah, and I think, on your rejection rate, Greg, I think the biggest issue, because I've heard this from at least a dozen restaurants, if not more, is that when the federal government put that PPP program in, they required the money to be spent in the first 2.5 months. For payroll, you had to bring your people back, 75% on payroll, 25% on rent and utilities. So all these restaurants had to bring all their employees back to pay them, yet the governor had them shut down. So the governor had it shut down for 3 months where you couldn't do indoor dining. So then the federal government changed their guidelines as they keep putting out, their rules. And they said now businesses, restaurants and businesses, you now have 6 months to spend it on 60% payroll and the rest on rent and utilities. So these restaurants brought back individuals, put them on the payroll, but they couldn't open for business. They were closed down. But now under our program, we're telling these restaurants that they have to include the PPP money on their revenue when they compare it from 20 to 19. And I know a couple of businesses now that are bleeding 10,000 a month. And eventually in another month, they will be in a negative situation. But that PPP money, a number of the restaurants said, I wish I'd have known the federal government was going to give me 6 months. I wouldn't have brought back and put on the payroll employees who were not going to work because we weren't open. And I could be using that now, or I could be using that for additional rent. So a lot of these restaurants that are being rejected are having hardships, and it's because of the federal government changing their rules. And so these restaurants had to use PPP to pay employees basically to not do any work. They had put them on the payroll because they were required to do that. And so I think that honestly, we should be removing that restriction too in our program to count PPP money when we do the revenue calculation.
And Member Krajewski, if I could answer that or maybe add a little more to that, I couldn't agree with you more that when we rejected restaurants and told it, because we always tell them the reason you've been rejected. You've been rejected because you don't show revenue decline. And the first comment we get back from them, they don't go away quietly, and that's great. We want to hear from them. We want to help them. The first comment we hear from them is, well, yes, we don't show revenue decline because we did get some PPP, but in the next 2 months, our business, because we don't have the outdoor dining option, because we don't have tents anymore, we're going into winter, our business is going to fall off the cliff. So you need to look at future revenue as opposed to where we've been in the past. To your point, we were not allowed to do that, but I couldn't agree with you more that with winter setting in Illinois, it's going to be a challenge for these restaurants moving forward.
And had these restaurants known they didn't have to spend the money for 6 months, they would have never brought those employees back, and they would have a cushion now. They could be, going into this winter season and paying some of those expenses, but they were required to bring these people back, pay them for not doing any work, and then they changed the rules and said you have now 6 months instead of 2.5 or 2.
So, Member Krajewski, I think I understand that, and I, in an effort to move the meeting along, my suggestion would be, I think that's a point to raise at today's call at 4 o'clock.
Thank you.
All right, any other questions for Mr. Bedalov? All right, hearing none, seeing none, we now move on to our update from WorkNet. Ms. Shavak, is that you?
That is me. I have a presentation also. Here it is. Okay, so as I've been providing this at every meeting, the first bar graph that you're seeing there is the national numbers for unemployed people by type. This is pulled from the Bureau of Labor Statistics. And as you could see, the trend continues here, the most recent data being for October, where those permanent job losses are now clearly exceeding the temporary layoffs. As we know, when the pandemic first started, many people were on furloughs and things of that nature. Now, the overall unemployment numbers are going down, which is great to see, but we are seeing that the majority of people that are losing their jobs are losing them due to permanent dislocation rather than furloughs. So that's obviously a trend that's going to significantly impact the work that we do. The most recent data you may already be aware through IDS is for September. DuPage County, as you can see here, 8.2%. The state of Illinois overall, 10.2%, and we're ahead of higher than the overall national rate of 7.9%. You could see the Collier County area and region, metro region here that we're a part of. We're kind of in the middle. Cook County is obviously the highest, and then, we're a little bit higher than Lake County and some of the others. Next slide, please. Wanted to give you a snapshot of our most recent activity from the month of October. Despite all of the disruption, we continue to provide all of the same services uninterrupted that we typically do. We funded new 40 individuals in the month of October. You could see there on the pie graph, the vast majority fall into the IT or management category, which is pretty much always the case for the population that we tend to serve and fund. Then we had a number of individuals that we trained for healthcare, 20% of that 40, 17.5% obtained or are in the process of obtaining their CDL licenses, and then smaller percentages training in manufacturing and HVAC, admin, office, or other type occupations. The total WIOA funds expended over the month of October on training services was $190,730 and some change. The interesting thing about this is that we are definitely seeing, and as one would likely expect, individuals coming to us that we're funding through our 1D grant, which is the grant for dislocated workers. You could see that's the vast majority of those dollars expended, much smaller amounts for our 1A and 1Y youth grants. Next slide, please. The month of November is apprenticeship month. So I thought I'd give you some information on some of the stuff that we've done around that in the past several years. We have partnered with at least 12 companies locally, basically all manufacturing companies over the past 3 years to fund ongoing apprentice development. We do that through the use of the incumbent worker training grants that this committee sees on a regular basis, the memos that are submitted. We are working closely at this point with Project Higher Ed, which is the College of DuPage's apprenticeship model, working on expanding the number of companies that are using apprenticeship models and working with College of DuPage throughout the county on that. Tomorrow, we are co-hosting an information session with the Project Higher Ed project lead through College of DuPage that we currently have somewhere around 13 to 15 companies that are planning on attending that session. So that's going really well and a good example of partnership there. And then another item of note, and I've talked to my colleagues at Choose DuPage a little bit about this. There is a national model called Apprenti, which is for information technology apprenticeships. As I mentioned, we've been doing a lot of work in the manufacturing sector, but as you could see with the individuals that we serve and fund, there is always a disproportionate amount of IT professionals. So I'm interested in expanding the footprint of this national model in the DuPage County area, and have had a number of meetings around that. It's a successful model in several states nationwide, but we don't have a footprint currently in the Chicago metro area. So I'd like for DuPage County to potentially take the lead on that. So I will keep the committee posted as we move forward in that effort. And then I think next slide, I think the next two are repeat slides, just to remind you that we are still running our From Layoff to Launch sessions in an effort to keep people connected and engaged with our system digitally, where normally we might be presenting this information live and in person when companies are having mass layoffs and closures and things of that nature. And so this is a flyer or a page that can be seen on our website. If you have any of the residents of your local areas, your constituents reach out to you, certainly redirect them to worknetdupage.org where they can sign up for this or a number of other services. Next slide. And if you visit this link, which I know has been sent out to you previously, it helps you share and spread the word. If you use newsletters or social media posts and things like that, we always appreciate any of your efforts to help us amplify our messaging and get the word out. And I think that is the conclusion of my presentation. If there's any questions, be happy to take those.
I have one on the Apprenti. I think that was the name of it for IT. Who would you look to be our partners, kind of our natural partners in DuPage County then? I'm wondering if Innovation DuPage would be a potential partner on that.
I definitely do plan on bringing Travis to the table from Innovation DuPage on this. Absolutely. I'm kind of taking it slowly right now because the person locally who's going to be from Apprenti, who's going to be helping roll this out, I want to be very thoughtful and make sure that we do things in the correct sequence where we don't get a bunch of employers revved up about it and then don't have the supply to meet that demand. But with that being said, in talking to Choose DuPage, there are a number of employers, potentially their board members that might be interested in hearing a presentation about Apprenti, and I have a number of our business customers as well. So I think with that info session that we're thinking about hiring, I'm definitely going to plan on bringing Travis to the table. Project Higher Ed that I mentioned is also going to be meeting with the gentleman from Apprenti to see if there's a linkage there too.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions for Ms. Shavak? Okay, seeing none. Thank you, Lisa. Thank you, Greg. We'll now move on to the item of business called old business. Anyone have any old business for the committee? All right, any new business for the committee? All right, seeing none, I will, before we adjourn, just offer a couple of thoughts. Number one, if you looked at the minutes from October, we had talked about having Evelyn Sanguinetti in to discuss fair housing in DuPage County. Given the results of the election, I didn't think it was appropriate for me as the chairman of the committee to begin that effort now. But I would encourage whoever is going to be heading this committee in a couple of months, I would really hope that you would take a look at fair housing in DuPage County, because I do think that's a critical component of our economic development efforts. Evelyn is willing to come in. I know that there are a number of other highly qualified people who can work with us as well, but I would encourage you to do that going forward. Second of all, I'll just say this is almost certainly my last meeting as the chair of this committee. So I want to thank all of you. It's been a pleasure to work with you, and particularly Lisa and Greg and Beth, who I don't think is on. Thank you for everything that you guys have done and are doing. And so with that, we will stand adjourned. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you too.